Here is the 2-valve 4.6 V8 that will be doing the cam timing on. This is the condition that I like to have them in. Cams are installed, cam girdles are torqued, no cam followers, no lash adjusters on either side. The chain guides are torqued to 90 inch-pounds. You can see both sides have no followers or adjusters. And the keyways are facing down. The engine is at top dead center. Here are some of the tools that I'll be using. The crank turning tool, comp, trick flow, cam degree kit. I'll put the part numbers down in the description. The kit comes with directions, so written directions, you can follow those. Comes with a degree wheel. The only thing I added was they have a kit, and I'll put the part number below, for a steel plate and a solid lash adjuster. The first thing we need to do is get our wheel set up, so we'll put the crank tool on there. So here's my pointer. I have it set up at this this angle so that I can remove the wheel on and off, and I like to attach it to this hole right here, the water pump hole. Before I tighten the pointer down, see it's still a little loose, I'd like to line it up to be in line with the markings on the wheel. And now the wheel itself can come on and off. And we know that our keyway is over in this area right here, which is somewhat in the top dead center area. So we can put our wheel somewhere close to top dead center. I think it's a little past top dead center, so I'm going to put it over here. And this doesn't need to be exact right now. We're gonna put a piston stop in there and set this up. Okay, 1/2-inch breaker bar. This makes it easier to move the crank around. Here's a piston stop that came with the kit. I had to grind down the little bevel on here so that it would thread in. You may or may not have to do that depending on if you have 4 or 9 thread spark plug holes in your heads, but that's what I had to do to this piston stop. And then I wind out the actual stop portion all the way and then put it in just like it's a spark plug. Now with a long screwdriver, we're going to wind out the actual piston stop portion. And you can feel it come into contact with the piston. When it stops moving, you don't want to put a whole lot of torque on this thing, you just want to touch it. And now if we're where I think we are, which is before top dead center, we should be able to go backwards. Now I'm going to go forward until I touch it. And take a look at what we got. We got 20 degrees on this side of top dead center. So here's top dead center, we're at 20 degrees. And now we know that it won't go to top dead center, so we're not going to try and rotate it this way. We're going to rotate it around until it touches the piston stop again. Now when you start getting close to top dead center again, you want to slow down because you don't want that piston crashing into the stop. Okay, so we're right at about 12 degrees, so there's not much there. What I'm probably going to do is I'm going to back it off, put another turn on the piston stop just so we have a little bit of a buffer in between there. The idea is to get the same amount of degrees on either side of top dead center. Okay, so I'm going to push it forward a little bit. Now I'm going to put a little turn on the piston stop. I'll move my wheel a little bit. Okay, so now I'm going to go and see where it touches. You can feel that it's definitely touching right there. It stops. Go back. Stops. So on this side now, it stops right at, there's a little bit of play in this thing, so right at, I'd say 10 degrees. Now we're going to rotate it back around and see how many degrees are on the other side. Remember, start slowing down when we get close to TDC. Okay, so we got 10 on one side and 22 on the other side. That's a difference of 7 degrees. So 7 degrees, we need to take 3.5 degrees out of it. So we should be able to go put it on 18, and should have the same or pretty close to the same on each side. So let's try moving the wheel to 18. So without touching the crank, I'm just going to loosen it up and move the wheel over to 18. Okay, so we got 18 on this side. We'll rotate it around, see what we got on the other side. Now we got 13 on this side and 18 on the other side. So that's a difference of 5. So if we go 2.5, maybe that'll put us where we need to be. So I'm going to move this to 16. And now we'll rotate it around, see what we got on the other side. And now we got right at 15 degrees. So I'll go back around and make sure that we're still at 15 on the other side. We're getting closer. This may take a few tries. So we're right at 15. And this side is a little, let's say it's a little on 16, so I'm going to try and move it back just a little bit. Okay, so I've moved it to right in between 15 and 16, so we'll go around one more time. And we're right in between 15 and 16 on this side. So our wheel is set. So this step right here is a pretty key step. You need to get this accurate so that you know that when this is at top dead center, the piston is at top dead center. If at any time you need to go back and double check, make sure nothing has moved, like your wheel hasn't moved or anything like that, you can put the piston stop back in there, re-verify that TDC is actually TDC on this wheel, and then continue on. So now we'll remove the piston stop. I have to use a magnet to get mine out. Now we're ready to start setting up our dial indicator. So before I take the wheel off to put any of the timing chain stuff on there, I like to move the piston to top dead center on the wheel so that when I go and put the wheel back on there, it should still be showing at top dead center. So our cam bolt is ARP cam bolt. It's got the ARP assembly lube on the threads and on the bottom of the head of the bolt, but not on the bottom of the washer. And so now your timing chain can go on, and you should have 2 dark links. If you don't have 2 dark links, then you can put Sharpie mark on here too to make it darker if you want. You set the chain up like this, and then go all the way down to the bottom, and then this one that's at the very bottom would be your other one, so you'd put a dot on that one as well. So we'll put this chain on. So now we got our dot lined up with our dark link. And on the bottom, we got our dot lined up with our dark link. So this is important that I always keep the dots in the dark link lined up. So whenever I remove them or remove everything to grind on the sprocket, I put it back to the dark link and the dots on the top and the bottom. When I'm done with this side, you want to make sure it's still dot to dot before you move over to the other side. Some people can do one side and when they get their measurement, then leave this 180 out and then start on the other side. So always double check that you're dot to dot on both sides. But right now we're just working on this side, so we're good. We got dot to dot. I like to use this clamp just because it's quicker to take on and off. So I'm not putting the tensioner on and off. When you put this on, you don't need to put a whole lot of tension on there. You're just taking out the slack. Put our wheel back on. Up top here, we're going to be focusing on this cam lobe. So we're going to be working on number 6, and the reason why we do number 6 is because number 6 is the companion cylinder to number 1. When number 1 is at top dead center, so is number 6. They're on different strokes, but they're both at top dead center. So this is the intake lobe right here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to back the engine around so that I can get that lobe up out of the way. Now I'll put our solid lifter in there. You see there's like a set screw inside of it, and it comes with a Allen T-handle to put down in there, and you screw it in. And as you screw it in, it actually lifts this up and makes it bigger, and that's what we use to take the lash out of the follower. So that just slides in. And you can take any of your cam followers. All the lash adjusters and cam followers in these are interchangeable, so you don't have to keep them in the same order. The round part with the hole in it is going to go on the lash adjuster. Here's a T-handle. It comes with the kit. So you can see that the lash adjuster wiggles right now. As we tighten this down, now it doesn't wiggle anymore. So that means we've taken up all the play or all the lash out of the cam follower. Now we're going to move on to set up our dial indicator, and we want to get our dial indicator on the valve spring retainer. You don't want to over tighten this because you don't want to strip out the aluminum heads. The dial indicator, kit comes with this extension and a stud to put in there. If yours has the tip on it, just unscrew the tip, put that stud in, and then this extension will thread right on. So when you put this on there, if you get it somewhere close with some preload on it, you're okay, because we're gonna rotate this around and then get the cam lobe pushing down on the valve all the way, and then readjust this whole setup and zero out our gauge. So just get it close for now, and now we'll rotate it around. You can see now as we rotate it around, now the cam lobe is pushing down on the lash adjuster, and you can see the readings start to go up. There, it stopped. You can go back and forth a little bit and see that it's stopped. Now I'm going to readjust this just to make sure that everything is good, and you want your indicator in line with the angle of the valve itself. You don't want it off to the side or up and down. Okay, so that's pretty good. It's actually on 0 right now. I don't know if that's going to be accurate or not, but now we have to zero out the gauge. We got to find when the needle stops moving and then put the 0 on there. Particularly, you want it to be on 0 when you're going in a counterclockwise rotation, because that's the rotation that we're going to use when we get our measurements on this. So there, it looks like it's stopping right there. Okay, so when you have your indicator on there, I just moved it up a little bit because when you go to move this around, I had it too low and it was hitting on the clamp area. You also want to make sure your clamp area is on the part of the dial indicator that doesn't move. So you don't want to clamp this portion right here that goes up and down. And you also want to make sure that this extension stays tight on there. So you give it a little twist just to make sure it's on there. Okay, so that looks like it's good on the back side of the cam lobe, so I'm going to back it around again, get it on the front side of the lobe. All the way to 0. I'm going to go one more time. This is clockwise to make sure that it stops on 0. And it does. So now we're going to go backwards again to get it on the front side of the lobe. There's 0. Go all the way back around to 0 again. And so now we're ready to take our first reading. When we get a reading, we're not going to get our reading at 0. We're going to get our reading 50 thousandths before 0. Take a reading on the wheel, then go up to 0 and then back to 50 again on the back side and get a reading there. Add them together, divide by 2. That's going to give us our intake centerline for this cam where it's set up right now. So our first reading, we're going to go, this indicator is going to go over to 50. I'm going to stop, and then we're going to look and see what we got on the wheel. So we're at 0 right now. There's 50. And we got 74. Now time to take our second reading. Again, we're still at 50. So we're going to rotate the crankshaft over until this indicator goes to 0, and then it's going to go back down to 50, and we're going to get a reading on the back side. There's 0. And there's 50. Yeah, 142. 74 plus 142 equals 216 divided by 2 equals 108. So comp calls for a 109 center line on these. So I like to get within a half a degree. So what I'll do is I'm going to try and put some tension on the cam and see if we can't get at least a half a degree or a degree to get it up to 109. Before I go any further, I want to explain how we would get, how we would change our cam in relation to what's going on here. So we had 74 reading down here, and then 142 reading up here. So our intake center line was somewhere in there, which is 108, so we're right there. If we want the events to happen sooner, we need to advance the cam rotation. If we want the events, and by sooner, that means we need a smaller number. So if we need a smaller number, let's say we were trying to get a 106 center line, we would advance the cam because we got a 108. If we wanted a 106, we would advance the cam. So we want a bigger number, so we want both of our readings to be further down the wheel. So if we want a bigger number, we need to retard the camshaft so the events happen later in relation to the piston going up. And I'll show in a second. Once I get it off the cam and I take the bolt off of there, I'll show you what side we're going to grind on, or which side we're going to pry it up against. Okay, so I'm going to back it off of the cam lobe. Loosen our bolt. So if we take a look at our cam gear, here is the key, and you have the keyway in the cam. So there's a little bit of play in between there. And so what that means is the cam has a little bit of play back and forth. And if you needed to get a smaller number, you would want to advance the cam. If you wanted to get a bigger number, you would want to retard the cam. And so if you needed the cam to be more advanced, you would grind this side of the key. If you wanted the cam to be more retarded, you would grind this side of the key. And then when you put your bolt on here, you want to make sure that your cam is in that position, because there's going to be play. As there is right now, you can see that the cam is all the way forward. There's no air gap between the cam and the sprocket, but on this side, there's a little bit of a gap. So what I'm going to try and do is get rid of that gap over here. So I'm going to push the cam backwards and then tighten the bolt down and see what our reading is after that. Okay, I actually have my dial indicator in the way of putting a wrench on the cam, so I'm going to use the spring and have the spring put the tension on the camshaft in the direction I want it to. Okay, so I've rotated the camshaft up onto almost to the peak of the lobe, and now we have the spring putting pressure, pushing the camshaft backwards because it hasn't gone over the top of it yet. If we wanted to push it forward, we'd go over the top of it, and then the spring would be pushing the camshaft forward. So right now it's pushing the camshaft backward. You can see there's very little air gap on this side of the keyway and more air gap on this side. So I'm going to leave it right there. I'm going to put the bolt in there and see what that gets us. Now we'll double check to make sure that our gauge is still zeroed out. Know how much to go. There's 0. We're going to get it back on the front side of the cam. So backing up, 0 again, all the way to 0. So now we'll get our first reading and see what we get. So we're at 0, we need to stop at 50. There's 50. Now we got 76. Now our second reading, we're going to go to 0 and then back to 50. 0. There's 50. And we got 144. So 76 plus 144 equals 220 divided by 2 equals 110 on a 109 center line. So we were at 108, so you can see that just the play in the cam gear gives you 2 degrees of difference. So we need to be right in between there. So I'm going to go ahead and back it down again, take the nut off, and see if I can't get the sprocket right in between the play that it already has. So if you grab the camshaft and move it, you can feel that there's that little bit of play, and that's going to be our 2 degrees. So we want to get it in between there. We don't want it advanced, we don't want it retarded, we want it to be right in between. Okay, let's see what that gets. Now we wind it up to make sure it's zero, still zeroed out. Okay, we're good there. Back it on the back side. Now we'll get our first reading. And we're at 75. And our second reading. And 144. 75 plus 144 equals 219 divided by 2 equals 109 and a half on a 109 center line, so I'm good with that. Now take this dial indicator on. I'm going to back it down off of the lobe. And before I forget, I'm going to torque this to 90. This gets torqued down to 90 foot-pounds. To get our follower out, we need to run our lash adjuster all the way back down in there. Once it bottoms out, you can get the follower out. Now the lash adjuster. Now you can put your tensioner on, metal tensioners preferably. And these are torqued to 20 foot-pounds. Now you can pull your pin. And again, before we move to the other side now, I'm going to put our wheel at top dead center. Cam spacer, sprocket, ARP bolt with ARP assembly lube on the threads and on the bottom of the head. Now you can double check your dots and your dark links, make sure that's good. And now we set everything up to do our intake on number 1. So now we need to zero out our gauge. If you notice, the intake cam lobe on number 1 is facing this direction. So instead of doing a full revolution and bringing it all the way around, I'm just going to back it up and get it on its high point. Okay, the gauge is zeroed out now, and I got the cam lobe on the back side of it, so the spring is actually pushing the cam forward, and I'm gonna tighten it down in the forward position and see what our reading is. If we need to, we can put it in the backward position or the retarded position and see what we got. But now we know that we're in the forward position. Okay, now we'll get our first reading, 71. And now our second reading, 138. So 71 plus 138 equals 209 divided by 2. 104.5 on a 109 center line, so that means we need to go 4.5 degrees. Okay, so back at our wheel, we got our center line is 104.5, and we need to go 109, so we need bigger numbers, so we need the events to happen later. So we need to retard the camshaft so that the events will happen later. I don't know if we'll be able to get 4.5 out of the play that's in the sprocket, but we'll put it on that side and see what it says. But most likely we'll end up taking that sprocket off and grinding it. Okay, so I'm going to loosen the sprocket. And so we want the cam to be in the retarder position, so we're going to put it on the front side of the cam lobe. Double check our 0 on our gauge. And now we'll get our first reading. 72. And second reading. 139. 72 plus 139 equals 211 divided by 2. So we only got a degree out of that, so we're gonna have to do some grinding. So before we do any grinding or take anything apart, I want to identify which side of the cam gear I need to grind on. So let's take a look underneath it. Okay, so we need to make the events happen later. So we need to bring the cam backwards so we get bigger numbers. So if that's the case, we need to grind on this side. Because that essentially, once we grind the key down, that'll allow the camshaft to move that direction, which is going to retard it in relation to the rest of the engine. Okay, so now I'll back this down to top dead center. Okay, so looking at our keyway, I like to put a black line just all the way around it so that I can gauge how much material I'm taking off. Got the cam in the vise. I use a combination of a Dremel with a small carbide bit and a big half round file. This half round file is really good for getting in close to the inner diameter. Don't forget your iPro. Once you grind on it from this side, it's not a bad idea to flip it around. Flip it around and grind from the other side. You can see how much took off. We'll see what that gets us. Now you can see there's a lot more play in there. Hopefully that'll get us our 4 degrees we need. Now we'll put everything back together. And now I'm going to go backwards on this to get the cam up on the spring and see if we can put some tension on there before we tighten it. Okay, so now the cam is on the front side of the lobe, so the spring's pushing up on it and it's pushing the cam backwards, which should give us, take away that air gap on this side. In fact, we can take a look at it. So if you watch this keyway, and when I go over the cam lobe, you'll be able to see it pop from one side to the other. You watch the key as it jumps over. There you can see it moving back and forth. So now the cam is in the advanced position. You can see our line right here that we ground on. We want it up against that side. You see we still got a little bit of a gap there. I got a high spot on the key itself. So we'll see what this gets us, and if not, we'll come in here and try and grind that high spot down. Now I'll double check to make sure the gauge is zeroed out. And now we'll get our first reading. And we got 75. Second reading. 142. So we got 75 plus 142 equals 217 divided by 2. We are at 108.5. That's within a half a degree of our 109 center line, so that's good. Now we can start taking stuff off. Torque the cam to 90. Put your tensioner in. Torque to 20 foot-pounds. And finally pull the pin. And that's pretty much it for degreeing the cams on a 2-valve. It's easier than a 4-valve because you only got 2 cams to worry about. The last thing I'll do is go and double check, make sure your dots are lined up with your keyway. And don't forget to put your reluctor wheel back on.